Welcome to the Pitchwerks podcast. I'm Scott McTaggart. Over the last 20 years, I've been a sales rep, a marketer, a manager, an executive, a consultant, and an advisor. This show is designed to give you access to my list of contacts so that you can learn more about how to present your ideas at work and succeed in your career.
Startups and salespeople, marketers and managers from the Epicast Network in Pittsburgh. It's the Pitchwerks podcast.
Well, the blurb just goes back to, sort of swaying people's minds in a way. Like, what if they like this painting, the way that it looks right now, and then they read a blurb about it or how it came to be, and they're like, ugh.
Happy Wednesday, Pitchworkers. Welcome back. Glad to have you. So today we're talking art, and our guest is Devon Sioui. Devon operates up in Ontario in Canada as an independent visual artist. She is literally my favorite visual artist. Her artwork hangs on my wall. I met Devon pretty much by accident, just having found her through the internet after she was publicizing her art on her website, which is devonsioui.com. Devon goes and creates these very personal experiences. She paints these abstract pieces, and then she has to turn around and tell people like what they're worth, how much they should cost. This is not something that the rest of us typically have to do. Normally, your product is something that is handed to you by someone else. They teach you about the product. You go find people that have a need for it, and you tell them, well, this has 2 USB ports and a 4-cylinder engine, and by the way, it'll help you make more money. We have a pitch that's based on things that you can point to and return on investment. Typically, those of us in the sales business do not have to sell something that we created ourselves. We're not necessarily in the passion and emotion and asking difficult questions business. Devon is in all of those businesses, and she's been successful at it. So I think it's an interesting viewpoint for those of us that are thinking about creating something, whether it be a piece of art or maybe just a product that we're not 100% sure everyone else is going to see the value of. Sometimes your startup is a niche startup. It's only for certain audiences, and Devon definitely knows what that's like. So I asked her to talk to us about what it's like paying your own way as an independent artist, and I think you're going to be happy with what we came up with. This is a very special episode to me because an old friend of mine and my favorite artist in the whole world, Devon Sioui, is joining us today. Devon, how are you?
I'm good, and so flattered. I'm your favorite.
You are my favorite.
I don't think I knew that.
And there's no two ways about it. Devon has the distinction of being the first person whose art I ever paid for. And we're not counting CDs.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about my obscene MP3 collection. I'm talking visual art, and that's the type that Devon does. She is an independent visual artist from Ontario, Canada, recently of Toronto, moved out to is it cool if I say it's the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's still, I guess, a city, technically, but it's not the big city of Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto's huge, comparatively.
Correct.
Devon has actually been sponsored by the Ontario Arts Council. She's an independent artist who makes abstract art. You can find Devon's work at devonsioui.com. That's D-E-V like Victor, O-N-S-I-O-U-I.com. So, Devon, I think the first thing that a lot of people are going to ask me when they see your name on the guest list is, what does an artist know about pitching? And I think you're probably going to think that's a little bit funny because of sort of the trials and tribulations you went through just trying to get an art rep and have your art hung in some of the places that it hangs now. Is that accurate?
And sort of just the name of your podcast, Pitchwerks, I was like, oh, yikes, like pitching. Like, that's like the scariest part of what I do.
I would believe that. Does it feel does it feel like they talk about where they go like, okay, well, I'm bearing my soul here, and then like my children are being put up for auction? I mean, I'm not an artist, so I can't necessarily identify, but the show definitely, I'm very sensitive to feedback about the show.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm less sensitive about feedback to my art, like my individual pieces of art. I don't really know why, because I'm actually a really sensitive person and I care what people think about me personally. But when it comes to like pitching myself or pitching my art, I have a hard time with it though.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's like an apprehension in some way to sort of like influence how people think of my art just by reading what I have to say about it.
That's literally what I was sitting here thinking you were going to say too, because it messes with the interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah, like my husband and I were just talking about this recently. Like when I go to a museum, I want to see the painting before I read about like the little blurb about what, maybe the artist was going for.
Right.
If they have that information. I always kind of wonder how they know that.
But then here you are, you're an artist and you're trying to make rent, make a living, and you're trying to represent that art to someone who will literally cut you a check so that you can go to the grocery store. So my question is, if you're not talking about, say, your skill or, being able to point to anything and go, oh, you see those paint strokes there, those brush strokes prove that I'm good at this, right? So how do you build value in art? And I realize that's a big question and it's probably unfair, but personalize it. How do you build value in art?
I personally found that when I started selling my work, every time I sold a painting, I sort of felt more confident in my work and I guess validated, and sort of each sale sort of helped me make the next step.
So confidence, to a certain extent, sounds like it helps.
Yeah, totally. And I think, we talked a little bit about an art dealer that wasn't necessarily a good experience for me, at least my time with it.
Right.
But I did sort of learn a good way about pricing my artwork, which was, he told me, pick a number and then multiply that by the square footage and then adjust it based on how you feel. Because I find pricing my stuff to be, next to the artist statement, like the hardest thing.
I can see both of those being very challenging, but the pricing piece seems more nebulous.
Right. I think the minute that you sell a painting for $500, or, if you want to say it, like you sell a painting for $100, then all paintings that you make sort of that fall within that realm are suddenly worth that much because you're saying they're worth that much.
Yes.
Because somebody's paid for it.
But let me point something out.
So you know that you're capable of selling it. Yeah.
Up until you got to that point, your baseline was zero, right?
Right.
So up until that point, your paintings, in your mind at least by pattern and routine, were worth zero. You were trying to figure out how you got to that point.
Right.
But how did you get in touch with that art dealer in the first place?
I think he messaged me, which was maybe a red flag, but I was,
Never trust a cold caller.
And just said, yeah. I really like your artwork and I'm a dealer and maybe we should talk. And it was legitimate. I'm not trying to say it was not. It just didn't work for me. But again, I did learn some lessons in dealing with something like that, which I think the most valuable one was pricing my art. It just sort of gave me a baseline to start with because I didn't really know where to start with. But I had sold paintings before that. I just sort of would increase. If somebody bought a painting for $50, the next one I sold would be $75. I would increase from there.
If you weren't doing art, what would you be doing?
Oh, that's a good question.
I tried.
I was working in Toronto. I was working at a social media marketing firm for basically the duration of my time in the city, which was about 8 years. And part of the reason we left the city was so I could sort of jump into art full time. Obviously, living in the city is more expensive, so I could do it more easily in a smaller town.
Just out of curiosity, what should an artist expect to pay for studio space in Toronto?
Well, it really depends, obviously. My first space was shared with 4 other people. Or sorry, 3 other people in a big old factory loft. The Coffin Factory. It's creepy. Awesome name.
I've seen the pictures. It was actually really cool looking. I hope it was just as much fun to work in.
Oh yeah, it was great. It was amazing. So that cost me about, well, I shared my individual space, which is about $200, 200 square feet, with a friend of mine, and I think we paid $300 a month for that.
Yeah.
But that was 24-hour access, and you can join collectives and stuff that are maybe a bit more affordable, or spend more money and get a private space. But
it's not free.
No.
And you had to team up with a group of people, and obviously that brings with it a certain amount of drama and angst. And I mean, I'm sure they're all your friends and they're lovely people, but for somebody who is trying to follow your path, they should expect to have roomy battles and those kinds of things.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I just think it's so important, like studio spaces, like whatever it looks like, I just think is like just so important. For me personally, it was what sort of woke me up to the idea that I could maybe do it all the time.
So I'm going to work with the idea of $200, right?
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, you can find some small sliver, because not every city's as big as Toronto. Not every city has their real estate in as high a demand. I think I'm kind of lying to myself right now, but just follow me through, right? So if it's $200, right, and you're selling a painting for, let's start with the number you first, said in your example of like building up your confidence, $50, right? So that's 4 paintings, and that's not 4 paintings to eat. That's 4 paintings to pay the landlord. Eating comes next, and eating may even come after your own personal rent, because you're obviously not living in the studio, right? So let's put $1,000 on for your personal rent and utilities and whatnot. So eating doesn't come until...
And materials.
Yeah, exactly. Like eating doesn't come until you've sold like 30 paintings at $50 a painting.
Yeah.
And this is a very serious question for people who have something to contribute to the artistic community and to the world at large. How do you price it, and how do you get your confidence to the point where you can pitch it? You can ask somebody to go, take a look at a painting and then write you a check for it. When you start breaking the math down like that, it kind of helps me as someone who's always been more operationally minded, right? So $50 just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you go, okay, what if it's 100?
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to sell 2 paintings in order to pay for the studio and 10 to pay for the apartment, and then we need materials, like you said. This art thing's expensive, Devon. Let's go back to doing social media.
I think that we live in kind of an interesting time, because it's sort of, being an artist is looking a bit different with, the internet and social media. People can make a living just selling like pet portraits on Instagram.
Yeah.
Really, if you got enough followers. And there's Banksy, who is selling his artwork downtown New York for like $30 a painting, and they ended up being worth several $100,000. But
which in itself was an art piece, him selling it for such a low.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing.
That's more meta than maybe I can handle.
Yeah, it's too much.
So it's a performance art piece done by a visual artist who no one recognizes. Like, I mean, just like you're just spiraling now.
Yeah,
he's
a mystery in himself.
All right, so
yeah, but back to the pricing. That's like, I think, like, there is a market for abstract art, and people who can afford art are expecting to pay money for it. Like a really big painting can go for a couple $1,000s on the low end.
Right.
Like right now, I'm working a lot with embroidery and doing embroidery hoops, and if you want to compare doing like a really intricate hand embroidered fiber art piece, like an embroidery hoop, and a really large abstract expressionist painting, the embroidery might take 20 hours longer than the painting took, but it's also really small, and the market for embroidery hoops doesn't necessarily support the idea of spending, like, your time is worth the same amount of money as...
I didn't realize how much more time that took. I don't think anybody probably did unless they did it themselves. It takes that much more time?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a weird medium. Yeah, it can be, yeah. And I am kind of new to it. I've only been doing it for about a year and a half.
But you're working at it fairly regularly as opposed to a hobbyist who's picking it up in the evening, yes?
Yes, and that's.
I mean, this is still your main focus, your art. So, I mean, don't give yourself a little bit of credit here, right?
No, it's true. I mean, it's amazing when you have time to work on, like, start a new thing and you have time to work on it, you can actually see progress quickly. It's great. But yeah, it does. It takes a really, really long time.
20 hours extra definitely does not help that person in the studio, right?
No.
The math we were doing a minute ago where we were trying to figure out how that person in the studio is going to be affected by, like, the per piece price. The math is not really very helpful there to that person trying to pay for the studio and their own personal rent and their groceries and their materials and everything like that. So, yeah, this gets more complicated as you go.
Yeah, like you want to sort of try new things and evolve your ability, but you also need to, sell things to pay for stuff.
You're making art, but ultimately, you also have a business which is marketing that art.
Right.
And they are two different sides of your brain. Mm-hmm. Tell me if I'm wrong before I proceed.
They're two different sides?
Well, yeah, because you've got the one where you actually want to create the piece, and then you've got the one where you actually need to be the person who's in charge of selling the stuff you made.
Yeah.
Right? And one is, I don't want to call it a hobby. I know, like that's insulting. I don't mean it that way, right? Like you've got one where it's like, it's very personal and it's very, like during that phase, you're not thinking so much about the money. And then you've got the other piece where it's like, well, we've got to sell what we made, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So am I right in thinking that first off, that we start from, let's just make the best thing we can. And then later you kind of put on a different hat and you take on a different personality and you say, okay, now we need to sell the things we made. Is that correct?
Yeah, to some degree. But I also find people can sort of see through that, at least for me.
Wow. I really want to know what that means.
Well, I don't know. There's a temptation to like I sold this one painting years ago and it's just a 2 foot by 2 foot painting. It's basically two colors. It was like light turquoise and fluorescent pink and orange. And I still get messages from selling this paint or from people asking if they could buy it. And I sold it years ago. And then there's just part of my brain that's like, oh, well, maybe I could make a few more paintings that sort of look like that. And like people will want to buy them because they're similar to that. I just find like when I think I know what the audience wants, or if I think I know what painting is going to sell, like I'm wrong.
Yeah, we get a little bit of that around here too.
Yeah. So it's like I hesitate to say crapshoot, but
okay,
it's definitely a different part of my brain.
But it's still a little bit hit and miss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. One of the things I hope to achieve by having you on the show is for people to understand that there is a path forward. There is a way to do this. So what advice am I not asking you for? What is it that we should be telling those people?
I think to just to do it.
You just got to start.
Really?
I want to talk to you a little bit about the Braille Project.
Okay.
Specifically as an exploration of communication, right? So, again, the Pitchwerks podcast, what we talk about here is how it is that people present their ideas. And I had already kind of been in touch with you. I already had your art hanging on my wall. And then this big announcement comes through about the Braille Project. Mm-hmm. And why don't you tell people what it is so that I'm not explaining it poorly?
Yeah, so the Braille Project is a series of paintings that I created with my sister-in-law, Faye, who's an author of books, and as well as a poet and Braille transcriber. So this was her idea to sort of incorporate actual Braille and tactile paintings in an effort to get people to sort of interact with these paintings by touch. as well as sight. But
That surprised me so much at the time of, because I've always thought of my painting as don't touch that.
exactly, yeah, it's kind of a fun idea because you don't. It's so taboo. You're not really allowed to go to anywhere and touch a painting.
No, especially my house. Don't touch.
Yeah. So yeah, we made a bunch of paintings with lots of texture and built with string and gel medium and just all kinds of stuff, and actual Braille poems written by Faye, and as well as like modified quotes from blind authors and poets that inspired Faye. So yeah.
So you had to apply for a grant in order to get the backing that you got. What was that process like?
Oh, well, it's quite long and tedious.
As they always are when the government grant process is involved, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it should be. But yeah, luckily I had Faye, who's an amazing writer and quite a good grant writer herself in her own right for her own projects. But yeah, we basically had to come up with a budget to present to the Ontario Arts Council to fund this project. And among, an artist statement, which also struck me as the whole process was interesting because with the artist statement, like I always have to remind myself just to be so simple, like very like explain your idea simply. Don't get too frilly, which is easy to do when you're talking about abstract art, I find.
Okay.
Or at least for me.
Right.
But yeah, that was the main thing. Just sort of, I don't want to say dumb everything down, but yeah, like dumb everything down. This is what you're doing.
Get it to the point where it's bite size.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what you plan on using. This is how much that costs. And this is why it's important, or your project's important, kind of thing. So.
And how many people apply for
that.
this kind of thing? I mean, I have no sense of the scale. Is it hundreds? Is it thousands?
This particular one was a smaller pool. It was about 100 people, and they awarded 40.
I liked it because you played with the idea of art, visual art, as necessarily only being for the sighted, and I liked also the idea of challenging just the overall basis of the medium. You're having these feelings, you're having these thoughts, you want to express them, and you say, okay, let's grab some paint. And then someone went, let's also get a Braille punch, which probably isn't even what the tool is called, right? But that's...
It's close.
What is it called?
I think it's just a brailing machine. You can get a brailing machine, and then there's also a handheld, I think it's called a slate and stylus.
Okay.
For individual ones. But yeah, Faye has both.
So a few minutes ago, we were talking about how, here's this Banksy thing where someone who no one really knows what his face looks like selling priceless works of art, right, for $30 on the street, and they're worth, six figures, right?
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that's almost like magic to me. I truly appreciate the sleight of hand that goes into some of these things, because I think, at least for me, and I can only talk about my own personal perspective on the universe, as limited as it might be, the fact that people and art and ideas and communication have been around as long as they have, and you can still sort of pull a rabbit out of your hat and go, paintings for blind people.
Oh.
See, that's a challenging idea for me, and that was one of the things that I truly loved out of your repertoire. I thought that was it was truly impactful on just the foundation, and it asked important questions, and take that as the compliment it's intended to be.
Well, thank you. That's a great compliment.
So now comes the time, and everybody has to do this, right? Everyone who comes on this fine program has to pitch us, sell us on the idea of their product or service.
Yeah, actually from a more, I guess a business standpoint, it's easy to get caught up in just sort of making art and hoping that people notice without telling them that it exists. That's the ultimate dream.
Well, we here at the Pitchwerks podcast would like to help you with this endeavor. Okay, so let's start off with where you're at now. How are you presenting the idea? What is your current quote unquote pitch? How are you presenting it, and how do you want to change it?
Well, yeah, I mean, right now my website is I just sort of quietly add paintings as I make them.
Right.
And occasionally I'll try and write something about that painting to sort of give it some color.
Give it a little bit of a story,
No pun
or
intended.
help it be its own separate entity. Now,
Yeah.
what don't you like about that?
Well, I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at keeping up with that, for starters.
You mean just like as they come out, you're not very good at adding them to the website, or you're not very good at writing these little blurbs?
Yeah, I'm not good at writing the blurbs. I don't know. A while ago, we were just talking about if I like criticism and how it hurts, or when you with your stuff, and I said that I don't.
Right.
But with writing, I'm kind of like, I don't know. People can talk to me in person about something I specifically said, so I'm more apprehensive about sharing writing, I guess. But I'd like to, because I like hearing about processes and that kind of thing, and it helps me connect to a piece.
So wait, out of everything, the thing that you feel vulnerable about is the blurb you write for your painting?
Yeah, I would say
I'm
so.
so happy to hear that, because actually I think I can help you with that.
That's amazing. I would love help.
Oh boy. I may
Yeah.
have set myself up with too high of an expectation, but let's give it a shot anyway, right?
Yeah.
Who says you have to be the one to write the blurb?
That's true. I have to be able to afford to pay people what they're worth to make me sound so cool.
I agree with this, but I don't. I think that you've got enough of a following at this point where you could have some fun with this, and you could show people the new painting on your social media channels and just ask them what the blurb should be. And then you pick the one you like.
That's true. In the past, I have asked people to name paintings before, and it's always a fun time.
That is fun.
Yeah.
And I think this is in that same vein.
Yeah.
I love the fact, though, that what you're worried about is the blurb. Because I do think, obviously, you're fairly well established at this, right? So, I'm sitting here going like, why do you want to change anything? I can see wanting to get paintings to the website faster. That makes sense to me, but in terms of like writing the blurb, oh God, everyone hates the blurbs that they write.
Well, the blurb just goes back to, sort of swaying people's minds in a way. Like, what if they like this painting the way that it looks right now, and then they read a blurb about it or how it came to be, and they're like, ugh, that's awful.
How about if you sabotage yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, and they're but I almost had a sale.
I thought this was about elephants in the jungle, and as it turns out, it's about the, Industrial Revolution. I'm out.
Yeah, and actually, I do want to say something that I found interesting, just sort of about selling artwork in this day and age, if you want to say,
Yeah.
And also blurbs and sharing things online and how that can sway people's thinking. I had the first time I was ever approached for a commission, I really connected with this woman. She had told me that she painted her dining room because she wanted to buy this specific painting. Actually, the painting I was telling you about before.
Right. The one that everyone called about.
Yeah. I had to tell her I sold it. And so she was really upset, but she wanted to talk about a commission. So we worked something out with the same color scheme. And long story short, when it came time to do the transaction, send her the painting, get the payment, I didn't take 50% down. Lesson learned.
Right. You have to.
She, right up into like the point where she was asking my address to send the check, she just disappeared. And I've always wondered why. Because we really had, kind of like you and I, where we sort of we got introduced through artwork on the internet. We talked back and forth. You bought a painting. We sort of kept in touch. It was a similar sort of dynamic where she wrote a blog. She wanted to write a blog post together about how to commission artwork. So it was like a friendly relationship. And then she
And it seems like a fairly committed one.
Right. And I could never, until recently, I think I Googled her recently because I was like, I really wonder what happened. Because for a period of time, I actually thought she might have died because like not responding to any of my messages or anything. And
literally ghosted.
yeah. And I had people actually, thankfully, that wanted to buy that painting. And I had to say, it was a commission or whatever. So I really wanted to get in touch with her because I wanted to sell it. So I ended up selling it. And I still don't have confirmation on what it was, but
I was just thinking, and I hate to kind of give you whiplash going back to the blurbs idea, but here's the other thing. Who says it only has to have one blurb? Right?
That's true.
I actually kind of like the idea of like blurb roulette, right? Where there's like 8 different ones chosen from your like, your loyal following of, which I am a member, where you just kind of throw this out there and you go, okay, tell me what this painting makes you think and we'll pick the top 5.
Yeah, that's true.
And one person goes, it reminds me of my mailman. And the other person goes, I need to buy jam. And the other person says, Industrial Revolution. So there's a lot of Industrial Revolution on today's show.
Yeah, I once got an email from my dad saying he watched his surgery as it was happening, and he was just constantly reminded of my paintings.
It's curious. I envy your ability to sort of to stand up and do what you do. I don't have any talent for it myself, but it's always interesting to me to get inside of the heads of the people that are asking the interesting questions, especially because a lot of it is so timely and it's influenced by the world and the current events and what's going on. So a lot of times I kind of feel like when I look at, some of the current art that comes out, I can generally tell where that person's at, and sometimes I can write my own little story in my head as far as where the emotion comes from, where the story originated. And you're doing a great job of it. I really appreciate, what you're contributing to the world. I hope you do a lot more of it. Good luck with motherhood. Devon, thank you for being on the show. From all of us in the audience and from the Pitchwerks podcast, I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this week with Devon Sioui on the Pitchwerks podcast. I'll see you in about 7 days. Thank you so much for tuning in.
The Pitchwerks podcast comes to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a production of the Epicast Network and McTaggart, LLC. Engineering and production by Buzzy Torek and Nick Miller. For more information, show feedback, and ad sales, visit pitchwerks.com. pitchwerks.com. On social media, find and follow the show on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram using that same brand name, pitchwerks.